I would like to show you how to create this very stylish greetings card. It uses one of the cut, foil and emboss frames and takes advantage of all of the extra details that those offer. For this card I'm using the Cathedral Window, but this technique will be achievable with any of the cut, foil and emboss frames. As you can see, there is a lot of extra detail, so it's not just a cutting edge with these dies. There is a lot of detail that will be embossed into your cardstock. I'm working on a square card that's 135 millimeters, 13.5 centimeters, and I'm also going to be using some of these papers that I've created with just some different sprays and inks. To layer things up, I'll be using dimensional glue and foam pads. To add some colour through stamping, I'll be using a couple of these pigment ink pads. And of course, because we'll be working with lots of little fiddly bits, I'll be using my tweezers and my turbo glue pen, both essentials in any craft room. I've got a few things to decorate the card with here, but obviously this will depend on what you've got in your stash. I've got a tag die, some sentiment stamps, a couple of pearls and a flower punch. To begin, I've cut myself a square from black cardstock with a die and also added some detail, and then I've cut two pieces of the patterned paper down to 10.5 centimeters each. There's just a quick close-up of some of the detail that's going on there. The black and the green cardstock I've layered up with foam pads onto the front of the square card. And next I'm going to die cut the purple cardstock. I'm using a regular die cutting machine, as these are classed as thin metal dies, even though they've got all of that extra detail. So you would work in exactly the same way. You put the die on your adapter plate with the cutting edge facing up, and just a little tip here, when you're working with square edges, put them at an angle on your cutting plate. That reduces the pressure that the leading edge will put on your machine as it goes through, so it's easier to wind. I'm going to keep my cardstock in place face down with a bit of masking tape, and I'll put my cutting plate on top of that and then run it through the die cutting machine. That bit wasn't shown, I thought you didn't need to know that. Once cut, obviously you can take away all of the extra bits and whatever else comes out of your die cutting machine. There are release holes in these dies. They're the small round holes. All of the other bits you can see generally release the waste, but the dies release really easily. Okay, next up I'm going to pop that on the front of the card, and to avoid hassle with tape, foam pads and all of that, I'm going to use my turbo glue pen just to put a very fine line of glue around the edges, and then of course around the areas that I want to make sure stick. So I'm not going to have any raised bits. Just light pressure on the turbo glue pen as you're drawing with it is enough to get that flow going. And by the way, here's a secret between you and I: the turbo glue pens are refillable. Okay, on we go. If you need to stand to find the right position, do that. I had to avoid that because the camera's overhead and I didn't want to go knocking it. Once it's down, I generally like to put something on top, something big, flat and heavy, just to keep it in place while the glue sets. And it's only for a couple of minutes. Obviously for the benefit of time here, I've cut that bit short. Next up, another perfect application for the glue pen is when you're applying these small gems or pearls or faceted stones, because you can put very tiny blobs of glue exactly where you need them. So I'm going to work around the central aperture of the cathedral window, and I'm only putting on a few dots. Obviously if you like this look, You can go absolutely crazy and put as many as you like on. Just one tip though, you'd probably want to do section by section so that your glue doesn't dry out in between. And now for the wrestling with gems. Thankfully, very fine tip tweezers help on this situation. I did once have a very cool tiddlywinks action when I was doing this, but I seem to have lost that lately, so I'm just using my other hand to help flip over the pearls. Obviously, if you have a sticky pickup tool, this could also help. But today I seem to have a steady hand, so I'm doing all right. Ooh, those two are stuck together. I'll save those. They'll be like a 4-leaf clover. Okay, one more. And then we can move on to the next stage. Always like to close up those cases just in case I knock them and everything goes everywhere. Right, next up I'm going to create some of the bits that are going to decorate the card. So I've just used some sentiment stamps to stamp out on some white card the phrase "Be creative, be you." Then I've die cut that with a tag and then repeated the cut with the black cardstock to give me a shadow layer for the tag. I've also put foam pads on the flat end of these tags, but you can't see that at the moment, and I'm using my turbo glue pen to stick the tag ends. There's one of the foam pads. It's just to give them a bit of dimension on the card. Sticking things flat is great for getting them through your post cheaper, but sometimes dimension is the only way. I'm not just going to rely on the foam pad itself to stick this to the card. I'm also going to add a little bit of glue to the head of the tag as well. Next up, I've created some floral decorations for the front of the card, just using a few punches and dies that I had in my collection. Obviously you can use whatever you fancy. Generally I've designed the dies, the cut foil and emboss dies, to work with all sorts of styles. So hopefully you will already have something in your collection. If not, I'm sure you will find something available for you somewhere soon. So I'm just layering up 3 different die cuts of flower shapes here, and using the flat end of a pen just to push that down and make sure that glue sticks. And then in a moment I will also use the flat end of that pen to help me start shaping that flower. Some people like using foam pads for this, some people like using rubber pads. I tend to find that the pudgy palm of my hands works really well for pushing those shapes into and giving it a more organic or natural feel. By bending the petals back, again it gives it lots of realistic dimension. And then of course once you've done a few of those, you can stick a brad or a gem or a pearl in the centre of the flowers according to the colours you're using or your preferred or available accessories. I also cut one of the flower heads from the green cardstock, and just with a little bit of manipulation I can create a leaf with those as well. So it just goes to show you don't always need exact shapes in your collection. You can get away with a few and then adjust them to fit your needs. A little bit of glue from the turbo glue pen helps to stick those two together. Obviously, I would always recommend leave these to dry before you start then trying to stick them to your card. This is why I made these in advance. I've also cut some branch shapes using some dies, but of course, again, you can use whatever you have available, whether it's punches, dies, or even just hand cutting a few different leaf shapes. To stick these on, I'm going to use two different glues. For the twigs, because they're such a fine cut, I'm again going to reach for the turbo glue pen. And I hope you see the benefit of having these in your collection right now, because I've just been able to do a fine line of adhesive down that thin branch and not get any on my cutting mat, which actually is a rarity for me, but I'm well impressed that I managed it on this occasion. I'm just going to stick that in place. It's actually quite a fast grab glue as well, so you don't need to hold it for too long, and obviously as it dries it sets completely. I'm crossing these over in the centre, but of course I could have actually cropped them down as well if I thought that those ends of the branch were going to show. But I know I'm going to put the flowers over the top, so I'm not too worried. Okay, onto the main flowers now. And as I said, I was going to use different glues. So for these, because they're so misshaped, I'm going to use dimensional glue. I like to put this on using a cocktail stick. Obviously you could just squeeze the tube directly onto the flower, but I find this way gives me more control over how much and where I'm putting the dimensional glue. I think it's time to get a refill. Always pop the lid back on that one so it doesn't dry out. Okay, time to put the flowers on the card. I'm starting with the two outer ones, the ones with the leaves on, because then I can adjust it a little bit once I get the central flower on. And there we go. Now I was going to put a bow on, but I felt that was probably a bit too much and it would cover the sentiment, so off it goes with that. Anyway, I hope you've enjoyed that little card coming together. Just a reminder, it uses the Cathedral Window cut foil and emboss die, but could be done with any of the cut foil and emboss frames by me, John Bloodworth, Gentleman Crafter. Thanks for watching. That's it for this video. If you have enjoyed your time with me today, please remember to give this video a thumbs up and subscribe for notifications of future videos. In the meantime, thank you again for watching, and I will see you hopefully next time.